This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. And you are on Ask a Doctor, Master Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation EITZ CHAYIM, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And it is a beautiful Friday, just a little bit washed from the rain in the past few days. I was just talking with somebody in Virginia, and so listening to, and they're getting rain as well. There are a little bit of flooding going on in there. So it happens. We are surprised when there is so much flooding with rain, but we keep building and building and building, and we build lower and closer to the water, and surprise,
naturally,
that's where the water goes.
Yeah, and what's amazing is that the storms the other night were so violent, but we have all of our plants are like right along the screen.
Uh-huh.
And they're like overflowing. And it's like they haven't had this much water in 10 years. Yeah, it's amazing.
There is a fair amount of water out there. And
there is.
Yeah, I've already had my first mangoes off of my tree thanks to the wind and the rain.
I'll bet.
It
and
knocked some things down. So.
I was dragging out this huge branch. It fell from a tree. If it would have hit our house, it would have been all over. But, do you have skylights in your house? No. Okay, we do. And the ice crystals, wow. The other night.
Oh, the hail?
I just knew that thing was going to shatter. It was.
It was pelting?
Oh, yeah. And I looked outside, and they may not have been quarter size, but they were large. They were large, and they're standing up on the grass, and it's like, whoa. Yeah.
So hail does happen occasionally. We didn't get anywhere that I know of where we are. We had, right before we moved out of Ohio, before we moved to Arizona, we got pelted with some hail that left all kinds of pockmarks in the cars.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, it stands to
golf
reason.
balls hitting it. Yes,
you bet. Yeah, they had a thing on Channel 5 of a guy who was driving up 95 when we got caught in the heavy duty, and his front windshield was, it had been hit at least a dozen times.
Wow.
Yeah.
That can be scary.
That was a Safe Light commercial.
Yeah.
But it did not break. That's the thing that's even more interesting.
That's wonderful for him and for everybody else, for that matter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So your house came out okay and stuff?
So far, as far as we know, we'll find out. Yeah, those are the kinds of details you learn later. But so far, it seems okay.
Yeah.
Now, the dogs are kind of funny when it's raining like that, and I go to the back door and I say, "Who wants to go out?" And they look at me like that.
Are you nuts?
Yeah. It's like, we don't walk in rain, we might melt.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I vaguely remember that, from our days. Yep.
Yeah, and I was joking with I've got two dogs. I've got Shadow and Imp, and Shadow, I think, has a serious sweet tooth problem. He got into there's a container that I use to take candy to a meeting that I chair, and just a little bit of hard candy for people. And he got a hold of one of those yesterday, apparently right before bedtime, because I got into bed and I was dead tired and looked at him and he's like, "Let's play."
Oh, no.
And he's not normally quite that obnoxious. So he was having some trouble settling down, so I think he had a bit of a sugar high going.
Oh, boy. Yeah, just as long as it's not chocolate. Yeah.
Well, actually, he had one of those, too, but there's so little cocoa in today's chocolate that it's not... It's so if you look at it, it's really like the baker's chocolate that's intense cocoa. That is the most dangerous. The teeny bit of cocoa that's in a chocolate bar, and it was a tiny chocolate bar this time. Last time he got into the chocolate, it was a big one. No, I'm not happy about that, but he's a clever boy.
Well, our dogs used to love peanut butter.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is about peanut butter, but boy,
They do love it.
they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I can actually remember the first time we gave Shadow some peanut butter, and he, sniffed it and grabbed it, and then the look on his mouth like,
Yeah, their teeth are stuck together.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
What is
Yeah.
this you gave me? But he loves it. There's actually a couple of chew toys that you can get for them that are peanut butter flavored, and
Really?
he likes those. Imp, not so much. Imp's a lot fussier, which is funny because when I was in the car with him, coming home with him, I was trying to explain to him that one of his jobs was to get Shadow to be less fussy, but Shadow's turning out to be the less fussy of the two. Oh, well.
Well, and just like children,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have totally different personalities.
Absolutely. Very, very different.
I mean, we had two of Carol's mother's dogs, and one, Shuey, was just a total love, and the other one was an axe murderer. and this dog, you talk about a major personality disorder. It was, he was brutal.
And they have very different personality. My mother used to call that doggyalities, but yeah, personalities.
Yes.
And just as siblings do.
Sure.
And anybody who's listening, if you have a sibling, your sibling, two things. One, grew up in a different house than you did because you were a sibling to your sibling. And that changed the system.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The system is different for each part of the system. So no two kids are raised, even though they're in the same home, they're not raised in the same family. The system is different. And the individuals are different.
Yeah.
Even twins, less so identical twins, but there's even some differences there. And some identical twins are mirror twins, and others are side-by-side twins. It depends on how the egg splits, the egg and sperm split once they're fertilized. And but there's a recombination phase that goes on after fertilization before the baby starts to form that is, if you will, like a crapshoot for the genetic material. The DNA is all free-flowing, and it recombines in new and novel ways. That's how people adapt over time to their environment. We're moving faster now than we can adapt, but that's why humans look so different, even though we're all humans, is because we've adapted to different environments and different situations, different food availabilities, and many other things that are different from place to place on the planet. And so that's one of the ways that our genes, it starts way back in the genes. So you aren't exactly 50% of your mother and 50% of your father. Each parent contributed 50%, but how it ends up is up to the randomness of nature and however you hold that happens. So, yeah, especially fraternal twins really have nothing more in common with each other than any two siblings, other than they spend time together growing up.
Wow, yeah.
And they develop a twin culture in their little diet and their little pairing. So, yeah, it's interesting. And that different personality, dog breeders know that. You look at a litter of 8 to 12 puppies, and every puppy's different. They behave differently. They look very slightly different, even if they're the same color. That's one of the things that I always explain to my classes, that when I had a litter of puppies, I used to raise silver and red poodles. Not silver and red together, but silver poodles and red poodles.
The red is beige?
Red is, for me, it was the color of an Irish setter.
Oh.
A very
yeah.
intense.
I love this.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous color.
But
and
poodles
Poodles
that
do
color?
come in that color, yeah.
Really? I
Yeah, they're
didn't know
not
that.
very, very common. There's a wonderful strain of standards somewhere here in the Treasure Coast because I see the puppies in different homes. That's that color. And they're gorgeous. I see them at a distance. They're standards. I had the toys and miniatures, the smaller ones, because they pack better.
The standards are large
Yeah,
dogs.
they're large dogs, very
Yeah.
large dogs. And I love them. I just don't have the room and the lifestyle for them, so it wouldn't be fair to them. But when I would look at a litter of puppies, there's a little more color variation among the red and the apricot, as you mentioned, the lighter colors. And not so much with the silver. Silvers are all born black, and they silver out at about 6 to 8 weeks. So if you've got this little fuzzy black thing and go and blow on the fur, and you can see the silver down inside it, and then it slowly works its way out, and it's really quite pretty to watch them go through that chinchilla gene process of changing colors. But when they're born, they're all just little black furry blobs, and I could tell them apart. I knew which ones were when, and because I could see the differences. And most people, well, anybody who didn't know the litter would have a much harder time seeing the differences until you get really used to looking at puppies. And the same phenomena happens when we look at people who don't look like those around us. And that plays into racism in some interesting ways. I wasn't going to talk about that, but let's go ahead and go there. So racism is in part because we are visual creatures. We are largely visual. And with that, we tend to recognize, just as I could recognize the puppies, it was because they were in my environment and it was important to me to know them. So those are some reasons for learning, is when you're motivated, because you want to do it, you need it, you want it, then your learning is much easier. And that's really, if you will, part of the challenge. And it's the difference between educating young children, teaching young children, and educating adults. Adults need to and want to learn, and if they don't, they check out. Kids will check out anyway, but adults will do it if they don't see a reason for it. And so it's important to tie in the education that you give older learners. And we see that reflected in, it's certainly reflected in the way I design a class shell, both for my classes at IRSC and at Kaiser and anywhere else, is to tell people why they're learning this subject and why it's important for life, so that they have a different idea of why they're learning it. Because it's not always apparent. Teachers tend to think, oh, well, that's apparent to everybody who's taken it. It's not. It's not automatically apparent. And so we need to explain that. And that's very, very useful. So getting back to racism, let's say that you're white and you live in a community that's 99% white. You are not going to be skilled at recognizing facial features of people who don't look like the people around you. You just don't develop that skill. You tend to lump them. Your brain says
The old
it's...
they look alike syndrome.
Yeah, they all look alike. And there is some truth to that, to the person who says it, because they just haven't learned to differentiate. They just don't know enough people who fit those descriptions. And it works both ways. Blacks who only live in black communities have trouble seeing white and Asian and Latino. Anytime there's a different set of facial features, if you're not used to seeing them, it becomes harder to see them. And I think that, all my training says, and my experience says, that that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have integrated schools and integrated activities, so that it not look odd and strange to us to see people who don't look like our relatives. It's just important. We're all human beings. We all need to be treated with dignity and autonomy. And that's the story of life. And so, yeah, we tend to lump those we don't interact with very often, for whatever reasons.
You know, I was so fortunate in L.A. I went through Catholic schools all the way up through the university, but we always were integrated and going. all the way back to the first grade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was just natural to all of us.
Well, that's a function of California and Catholicism.
That could be.
Yeah, it's a combination. And some communities are more integrated than others, and some individuals are more integrated than others. It's there was a time I can remember with my father listening to him talking on the phone and describing somebody, and he was describing the features and the height and the weight and all the standard things that you normally describe about a person. And then he stopped for a second and he had to think, and then he came back and said black. Because I guess the person asked, what race? And to my father, there was exactly one, human.
Sure, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And the point is he didn't see it. On the other hand, that's not entirely good either. We need to be aware that some folks in the world suffer because of appearances, because of perceived differences, being different from the quote-unquote norm or the group. And so we talk about, I know that some people are very upset about affirmative action and all of that. And the reality is that people are not able to compete from a level ground. They just aren't in our society.
Well, you look at, especially in Los Angeles. I mean, if you go to those inner city schools,
they're different.
And you go to Beverly Hills High School,
it's very different.
it's you wouldn't even know it's the same.
You even see that in Port St. Lucie, in the St. Lucie school district. There are better schools, richer schools, and poorer schools. It's not as much by race as it is by socioeconomic. And unfortunately, there's disproportionate amounts because our society is not nearly as fluid and moving as it should be. And I like to point to people and say things like, could you imagine if George Washington Carver, and if you don't know who he is, then Google him, folks, but we would all be less healthy and poorer if George Washington Carver had not overcome the odds to go to Tuskegee and become this huge, huge person in agriculture and just totally revised the way the South did agriculture. And when he was a young child, one of his best friends was a little white boy. And they couldn't play together after school started because they were in different schools. And somehow, despite those horrible disparities, he was able to surmount it. But that takes an incredible person. That's a system that says only the cream of the cream of the cream can make it to the top. If you're not white, it's not so hard if you're white to rise to the top. And we need a society, we really do, where the cream of the crop rises and where everybody has a place to contribute at an appropriate level, that they feel respected, they feel that they contribute, because everybody can do something. That's not Pollyanna, that's not some pie in the sky kind of an idea. That is saying that a society, a culture, functions best when the best possible talent is being used to the best of its ability.
I remember I was in St. Louis doing a basketball game, and I ran into my old 8th grade teacher, and she was running the hospital in downtown St. Louis, and we were in a coffee shop and started talking, and she brought up wearing uniforms. And she said, you know why we did that? And I said, well, it was awfully uncomfortable and stuff like that. She said, no.
To make kids more uniform.
Exactly. And you do not know who's rich, who's poor. We all look the same.
Yeah. And
I really, now that I think about it, there was a lot to that.
Yeah. That is very often the case in schools, but if the school is segregated, it doesn't help.
Well,
it helps rich against poor, but it doesn't help other things that need to be leveled, if you will. And the key is that if somebody's coming from a lower socioeconomic level, they need some assistance to overcome those handicaps. Handicaps is not a popular word these days, but if you don't have all the, so here's the piece, and I saw it back in the dinosaur days when I was working at the University of Pittsburgh, working toward my first master's, and we had a child care facility that was child care, and I think the first couple of grades for staff and students could leave their children there as well. And of course, not everybody who works at a university, I can tell you that, is wealthy, because I'm working at one. But
all these rich professors.
Yeah, nice try. I am not pulling down a Harvard professor's income. Would that I could.
Well, when I see
among other things, I'd have to live up there. Yeah.
When I see profs at USC making $19,000 a year, they aren't either.
Yeah, and that's true. There are some really not wealthy folks in academia. But what happens when the children were in this? So I was dealing with 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and I was doing a unit on Piaget's development, because he theorized that children go through different phases, and we actually replicated this with adults over at Kaiser. One of my classes here did it as an experiment. But what I did was I had 36 laminated, and in those days lamination was expensive, but 36 large, probably about 4 or 5 inches across, laminated shapes, 6 shapes in 6 colors, so that each shape was only in each color once. So 36 different pieces, 6 shapes, 6 colors. Laid them out on the table with a young child and said, please sort them. That's all I said to please put them in piles. And there were children who immediately just grabbed by color. There were children who grabbed by shape. And there were a few kids who put them in rainbow order by shape. Those were the serious going to control the world kind of personalities. But I could see very, very quickly where the socioeconomic status was of the child by how they sorted the pieces.
Really?
Yeah. It starts that early because wealthier kids, as a rule, have more toys and more colorful environments, more stimulation, more in what we call enrichment. They had a better opportunity to play with things, and so they had progressed beyond the color to the shape. Now, colorblind kids, interestingly, of course, bypass the color and go right to shape because they just don't see the colors. Or you might get a light-dark kind of assortment. Not everybody just did 6 piles either. So those were some of the things, and asking if people, checking them to see if they were colorblind afterward. But it was really very interesting. I could start to see the difference because the poorer kids just didn't have the enrichment that the wealthier kids did. And I stress that to my students at every class I teach. If you have children, please give them blocks. Even if you have to go to Goodwill and buy them, buy colored blocks, make them. Give the kids something so they develop eye-hand coordination. They start building with those blocks. They start to experience color, shape, texture. Those are so important as primary building blocks for our intelligence.
And read to them.
Oh, you read to them. Let them see the words as you read, and they will start to figure out the symbols.
I remember our grandkids that, when you would read to them, and then they would finish the sentence, and it was like, okay, this is really cool.
Uh-huh.
They get it. Yeah.
It's so important. Language is one of the, we start learning language really, really well at about 4 to 5. And that window closes when we're about 13. And if you think about when we teach kids language, we've missed the window.
Well, you figure Carol by the 4th grade could speak 4 languages.
And that's the time to teach that. And that changes how people look at life the rest of their life.
Yeah. And I would imagine as does music.
Absolutely. Music is a language too. And music is processed in a different part of our brain. we tend to think that we take in information and somehow our eyes are just transmitting symbols and cues and things. Our brain is what makes sense of it. It's why we have optical illusions, because if the information coming in has some of the wrong cues, then our brain processing will take those cues and attempt to apply it to the raw information that the eyes are picking up.
We when we were
Or ears.
Yeah.
Or taste buds, or
Speaking of the ears, when we were doing the Christmas Kids show at Palm Point, and the music teacher there is off the charts. He's amazing. And we're in the room with the jazz band. And you close your eyes, they're playing Take 5.
Wow.
And you would never know that it was not Dave Brubeck. It was amazing. And the teacher is, talking. The math in this piece is maybe 8th grade math. Mm-hmm. And here are these kids that are in the 5th grade that are just going great guns.
Yeah, tearing it up. And if we don't limit our children, they can accomplish amazing things. Young children are learning machines like you wouldn't believe. And those are so important. That's when the kids learn to smoke or not smoke. It's when they learn to drink or not drink. It's when they learn what language to use in the house. They learn by imitation, not verbally, because they're taking in all of that information. Mm-hmm. So important how we treat our kids in the early years.
I was reading on Facebook that Lincoln Park Academy, their chorus, is going to Carnegie Hall this year. And I'm thinking, wow. And they had a big fundraiser the other night at Big Apple Pizza down the street. And I was thinking, wow. And of course, we have these kids all the time on the Christmas Kid shows. And you think, just think about this experience for these kids, for Fort Pierce to entertain at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a wonderful, the opportunities to do things like that are just wonderful. And yeah, they do have to raise funds though to do it.
Oh yeah, they do.
They do have to raise funds.
Well, gotta work for it.
So this is as good a time as any to say if anybody would like to call in and ask a rabbi a question, it's 772-340-1590. And if you enjoy listening to this show, please consider sponsoring one or more episodes. All you need to do is call that same number, 772-340-1590, and ask to speak to either Greg or Carol. And they will help you do it, and they'll get you some sponsorship during the show. I'll mention it, and there'll be other times during the week that they will mention that you are there sponsoring us. So
you bet.
Lots of opportunities for folks.
We can do that.
And I'll even take a sponsorship from Crazy Louie.
Oh, Screwy Louie.
Screwy Louie.
Yeah. Yeah, he could sell some of those things
there you
and donate the money
there
to
you
the
go.
show. Yeah.
Lots of different ways to work things out.
There you go.
Yep.
So I'm interested. You mentioned that you had tried this experiment on your Kaiser class. How did that turn out?
Well, my Kaiser students actually did it, and it was very interesting. There were just a number of students, and basically they asked students in the flow, students and staff that were coming in and out of the building. We picked lunchtime because it's obviously a high flow time, and just asked people to sort the shapes. And it was they would look at you, and it was really interesting to see how people did. Some people laid it out in a gorgeous pattern and made a picture, and the students took a picture when that happened. So they're actually going to be writing up the research that they did to see who did it which ways, and what they asked the students and the staff what were their professions, and what level, how many years of college had they had. And so they've got a little bit of information. It's going to be fun to sort it through. But people still sort things differently. And again, that's one of the places where color blindness, of course, comes into play, because colorblind people don't see the shapes. But we had 5 and 6 pointed stars. We had triangles and squares, and then we had circles and I want to say ovals, because we wanted to have different groups of shapes inside the shapes. And some people used those. So they would put all the circles and ovals together and all of the stars together. It was interesting. It was interesting to see how differently. And I want to say that it was like 60 or 70 people that
Wow.
the students processed through the experiment.
So are men any different than women in this?
There were not as many differences as we thought. So
Interesting. Wow.
yeah, more by chosen career field than by. Yeah, well, that makes sense because different people are going to be attracted to different career fields, and how you sort these shapes is probably somewhat related to personality. In an adult, not so much in kids, because in kids it's a development stage. But we are all interesting, wonderful creatures. We all have the same basic human needs to survive, to feel significant for at least one other being, and dogs are helpful for that. Cats not so much. Having both of them.
Cats.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Cat.
No, I just couldn't do that. I'm not a cat person.
I'm not as much of a cat person as my husband is, so the cats gravitate to him and the dogs to me. But that's the way it works in our house. We both feed both, so it's not about who feeds. But yeah, the animals clearly have preferences, and that's fine. And part of that, I think, is because he's home more hours than I am, because I'm out of the house more. On the other hand, I take the dogs for walks, which they truly adore. So, as a matter of fact, this morning when I reached for the keys, the one dog was like, "We're going." No, it's like, "No, Mom's got to go out and do this radio show." So, yeah.
Wow.
Life in the house. He likes when I grab the keys because he thinks that means that we're going to go for a walk. But he's not always right. If I go in the drawer, that actually I have a separate house key that I use when I walk, because my big keychain looks like.
You bring the dogs with you, and Cliff and I could play with them during the show.
Oh, that would, yeah, I can just see how that would work. No, you wouldn't get any work done. They love to play.
Oh, I remember, I think it was Fort Pierce Police, or maybe it was sheriffs, that brought in one of their absolutely gorgeous canines. And this guy, he was so big, and he'd put his paws up on the desk, and he was marvelous. Oh, what a beautiful animal. And you could tell he was taking it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And it's fun to watch. It's interesting to see. Occasionally when I'm walking the dogs, we'll come across another neighborhood dog, and they always want to say hi to each other. And yeah. My guys are quite friendly. Shadow will sometimes bark if he doesn't think I'm letting him have enough lead to go play, but yeah, they're pretty good. They're getting better at just saying, "Oh, there's a rabbit there," and not chasing it. They're on leads, folks. They can't get away.
Well, now that's an interesting thing that you say about the rabbits. We have seen a ton more rabbits this year than we have in the past.
Well, we're making it harder for the bobcats.
Well,
Panthers.
And we had a bobcat family at that little country club across the street for years, and haven't seen it in 3 years.
Yeah, we're destroying their habitat and making it much harder for them to survive. And that's going to imbalance the ecosystem. One of my colleagues at Kaiser actually talks about that. He talks about urban ecosystems. And when we talk about this or that being invasive, and yes, they are, but we're as invasive as they are. We're changing the system, and there's going to be a new biodiversity that can thrive in the urban environment. And it will be different. And it probably will have pepper trees and syngoniums and all those things that aren't native to Florida, some of which are beautiful and some of which are a real pain. But
We were down on
And love bugs.
on in your neck of the woods on Becker Road, and driving down there all the way to the river, and
It's really, really, really,
Oh my
really,
God.
really changed.
there is a massive
Yeah.
development going on near Murphy Road, and it's like, this is unreal.
Oh, yeah.
Where are the trees? There's nothing left.
There's nothing left, and
clear
that is
cut it.
that is actually an area that not that many years ago I saw alligators walking, and that's
I'm sure you did.
and
Oh,
now
yeah.
I'm sure I wouldn't see any of that with what's going on. Same's true in tradition. I used to sit actually when I would come down the back roads, I'd watch the bats come out of the trees, the abandoned orchards that were on tradition. I can never remember which one's village and which one's tradition.
One
They
of
have
the
to-
main drags.
Yeah, one of the main north-south drag.
yeah.
And I used to stop along there at sunset and watch the bats come out of the trees. It was just interesting to watch. Bats, people think of bats and are scared, but bats do a phenomenal job at eating mosquitoes, folks. They adore what they look at as tic tacs in the air. And
Oh,
bats eat just a huge, huge amount of insects and help keep that part of the population at bay. And as you pointed out, there's more and more rabbits until we have enough feral cats to control that, which that population is growing too. And maintaining that at some safe level is just not easy. When humans mess in the ecosystem, we don't always get it right. Sometimes we mess it up more than we improve it. I mentioned very, very briefly the love bugs, and of course those were introduced into Florida, much to the dismay of people who drive in May and
That's right.
September.
thank you, University of Florida. Good job.
Yeah. Now, if we could find something that would stop the greening on the citrus fruit, that would be really wonderful. But who knows what little problems we'll create there.
We had on our IRC show, it's now Small Biz Florida, but it was Startup Talk back then. 2 IRC students, one was 18, and the other was a woman. She was, I think, a former nurse. She was in her 30s, and the 2 of them had just started at USDA labs. Because they had come up with a solution to citrus greening.
Oh, wow.
And so they've been working on this, I'm guessing. That was probably year 2 or 3 of the show, and it's been on for 8 years. So maybe 5 years ago. So they've been at USDA for 5 years working on their project.
Well, hopefully they'll bring something out that'll
Oh,
help.
wouldn't that be nice?
It would be wonderful. I'm thinking back to some of the early times that I've talked with some of the folks who were here back in the day when White City was the hub and Port St. Lucie was a distant dream in the future. And they talked about when Indian River, which at one time actually extended all that was an incredibly large, it's still a large county, but it was really, really large. And that Indian River was the home of 85% of the grapefruit production for the world.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that was the white seeded grapefruit, the famous Indian River grapefruit. And I can remember when suddenly there were pink grapefruits in the ruby red, and that started the decline of the Indian River grapefruit.
Well, we had for years a sponsor out of Indian River County, Hale Groves, and it was, and of course they were really big around Christmas time.
Send the basket.
Send the treasure coast to your
Yeah.
relatives.
Yeah. Well, and I can remember when I lived up north, one of the big joys was when we'd come down to Florida was bringing back bags and bags of citrus
Sure.
and just munching on them slowly until they died. They usually died long before I managed to finish them, but we would give them out to people, and yeah. So Indian River was not an uncommon stamp on it, and now there are still a few of those abandoned groves in the area.
Of course, if you had a bunch of that citrus and you were driving to California, say,
Oh yeah,
you'd have to surrender it
at the
California
border.
line
Yeah,
because of the fruit
Yeah.
fly problem that we had in California.
yeah, and things do migrate. We have a problem here in Florida with something called thrips, which is a kind of a fruit fly, little tiny sucking fly that sometimes you'll actually find them particularly in the lumber yard garden areas, because they don't do quite as good a job at keeping those down, and they come in from the nurseries and everywhere else.
Really?
So we do have an insect problem in our gardens. Not as big a deal because the predators come right in on top of the when they see the little flies, they come and say, "Oh, dinner."
Yeah.
And
Hors d'oeuvre.
hors d'oeuvres, yeah.
Yeah.
If so, I try to encourage people, don't use chemical means on them. Get some ladybugs, because they will stay as long as there's food, and then they'll move on and do their ladybug thing somewhere else.
All right. Where do you get ladybugs?
You can pick those up at the same garden stores. You can buy live ladybugs, or of course you can actually order them on Amazon or.
No, come on.
Yeah. I've done it. I have ordered live ladybugs when they haven't had them at the local stores.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
The big thing in Florida, get those out of your mailbox quickly. Yeah.
Ladybugs.
Yeah, ladybugs love aphids, as our sidekick over there is telling me. They do. They love aphids. So if you've got roses or any of the things that aphids love, get some ladybugs. It's a good natural way to do it. They will migrate out of the area and not be a problem or invasive if you, they won't be a problem. Ladybugs can handle it. Although, interestingly, there's a form of ladybug in China that is more aggressive and actually will bite a human if they. Yeah, there's a couple ones, and they know the Chinese kids that I used to teach knew the difference, because we had a unit on ladybugs, and it was about how wonderful they are in the gardens, and I'm not going anywhere near that ladybug, it bites, but there's a difference in how they look, and so my students would tell me the difference. I'd make them tell me the differences as a way of.
And they knew it.
They knew it. They knew the difference of which ones bite.
Wow.
So they're bigger. The biting ones are slightly bigger. That would make sense. The very little ones have got pretty good jaws. If you're going to eat aphids, you've got to be able to get in there and snag them. So, but yeah, I love using ladybugs, and there's often a few that live in my lanai that'll come in, and I don't discourage them. I don't chase them out, because they're perfectly welcome to eat anything they find, because they don't eat the plant. They eat the things that eat the plants. And that's something to be aware of, right? So people don't like snakes and want to chase snakes. A lot of the snakes keep the rats and the mice down, because they eat those. And if it's a black racer, just let it race. Not hurting anything.
They just scared the daylights out of you, though.
Because they move suddenly, and they can really look angry. There was a black racer in my backyard one time when I let the dogs out, and I didn't see it, and the dogs didn't see it, and they ran across its path, and they ran out, and I watched as the snake coiled itself up. It was interesting to watch, because it was startled. It had not expected the door to open and this herd of 1-foot elephants coming out, but it coiled itself up, and I sat there and looked at it, and the dogs were like looking at it, because it was clearly not a happy snake. And it allowed me to go out and walk around and go pick up the dogs and bring them back in. I didn't trust them to go past the snake. Mm-hmm. Not because I thought that it was a black racer, it wasn't going to hurt them, but there was no reason to have, if it latched at them, it probably wasn't going to go well for the snake either. And there just was no reason for that. And so I dragged them into the house.
And there were no snake charmers in your neighborhood, I take it?
Not really handy. And I'm not good at saying go on. And when I went back out a little while later, he or she was long gone.
Sure, I'm sure.
And there's a path out of my back door that's just right to the backyard, and they don't tend to look around, so they can startle things. And you can tell when they startle things because the lizards or the whatevers will pop into the trees or shrubs or whatever. I've got
Speaking of lizards,
Yeah.
those
The redheads.
new weird multicolored ones.
Yeah,
we had
they're
a-
replacing our native lizards, unfortunately.
We had a huge gecko population around the house.
And it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah, the big ones are eating it, and that's sad. I watched those when I first moved to Port St. Lucie. They were in and around the gas stations right off the turnpike down in Stewart, and they've migrated. They've just expanded and migrated. And the question is, were they dumped or did they escape?
Well, just look at
Yeah,
around
as,
here.
as Cliff is saying, they are. He's got the full name. Cuban. Oh, yeah, and then the Cuban tree frogs is another invasive. But I like them better than buffos.
Oh.
But there are many, many frogs. That's one of the things to be aware of. That not everything's a buffo. When it looks like a frog, it might well be a frog, and it might be native. There's a lot of different native frogs. One of my colleagues at Kaiser is really good. Whenever I see a frog, I'll snap a picture and send it to him, and he'll say, "Oh, that's a this or a that." It's interesting. I'm not good at identifying them yet, but I know that things that I might have thought were a buffo, he's saying, "Oh, no, those are not buffos." So, yeah.
Frog
So be
gecko.
careful when we round up the buffos. We might be rounding up other things that really do have a right to live in Florida because they're natives. And we're actually harming and making it easier for the buffo to take over. Yeah.
I just wonder how the pythons made it to the Everglades.
Oh, somebody let one loose.
Speaking of geckos.
Oh my gosh.
Oh
my gosh. Hi, little guy.
Look on the wall.
We have a guest here in the
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah. How
He's
about that?
liking the carpeted
Yeah.
walls. So for those who don't know, one of the things that is done in studios to dampen some of the noise activity, not make the room so lively, make it quieter, is to put carpeting up the walls. And it's wonderful for geckos. They can climb all over it.
Oh, yeah. Now
He's just having a grand old time. I hope he finds something to eat and something to drink.
Oh, I'm sure he will here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure some of them know how to get in and out of the building.
Go down by the trash can. There's Dunkin' Donuts and stuff.
Oh, there
in
you
there.
go.
Yeah.
Well, when I used to have pet lizards, they used to like ice cream.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I used to
Don't
get
tell me you went to Haagen-Dazs for him.
no, just the local hot doggery. It was where I had lunch when I was at school, and the lizards often went with me to school because they were on little tiny leads pinned to my shirt, so I'd know where they were.
Cliff used to have a monster lizard in his backyard.
An
We're
iguana.
talking feet.
Iguana, yeah.
Mm.
We had one of those that the dogs wanted to play with, and it wanted no parts of them. So I helped him get back over the fence, and last I saw him, he was winding his way down a tree. Yeah, we try to encourage those not to be in the assorted wildlife comes into my yard because we've got a good sized backyard, and we live near one of the washes, as we would call it in Tucson, one of the canal areas. And
The
so we'll
arroyos.
get the arroyos. And so we often have possums, and I love possums too. Possums don't get rabies, folks. They do not. But they do, again, love to eat fleas and ticks. So, yeah, if you've got possums, you've probably got fleas and ticks because that's what they're coming in to eat. They love those, and they help our ecosystem. The raccoon I was not quite so pleased with, and when it went up into the mango tree, we kind of invited it to go the rest of the way out. Unfortunately, Imp likes to play with those things, and they don't like to play with him, so I always have to pull Imp back in and say, no, you need to find your friends in the house.
But they do, I thought they did carry rabies. They don't?
No. Possums do not carry rabies.
Hmm.
They are extremely friendly marsupials. And it's sad because a lot of people call them rats, and they're not. They've got a very different head shape than a rat. They're distinctive. They've got a rat tail, but they're not rats. They're possums. And there's a family of them that lives down in the tradition area because I've seen them underneath the bushes when I've been in that area. So they're all over. They're in our yard. I'm sure that some of them are nesting quite happily in my mango trees.
There is a funny picture on Twitter. The Mets were playing in Oakland at the aging baseball stadium, and the visitors' broadcast booth was shut down because a possum family
Had moved in.
had taken over. And they had shots, and there's like 3 or 4 of these guys looking at you, and it was so funny.
Yeah.
And but you couldn't work in there, obviously.
Now raccoons are not notoriously friendly neighbors. My husband tells a story of his father trying to bungee the trash cans to keep them out of the trash cans because they love dumpster diving. And that they had heard some noise and opened the back door, and the raccoon's sitting there holding the lid to the trash can in his paw, kind of like a shield, like, I dare you, test me.
It was funny you talk about raccoons. One of our former cohorts
Now, raccoons will carry.
at Fox 11, that she was having a problem with raccoons. So all of a sudden, they heard somebody rifling through their trash.
Yeah.
It was a bear.
Oops.
and
There was
they're up in the mountains. They live up in the mountains.
Yeah, they're going to have bear there.
The bear was huge.
There was a cute video that was been making the rounds of a guy reclining on a lounge on his patio, and the bear comes up, and they caught it on the Ring camera, of course.
Yeah.
And the man and the bear scare each other. It's kind of funny.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you can see the guy go, and the bear going, and off goes the bear.
Sure.
Fortunately,
Oh, yeah.
because they don't really want to.
No.
They don't want to fight either. But just as always, don't get between Mama and her baby.
Yes. Yep.
So
that's true.
yeah. So I hope everybody has a wonderful. We're going to be May next month, next week. Be next month and next May. And to all my students who are finishing up their terms at IRC and at Kaiser, hope your grades are what you were expecting and wanting. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation EITZ CHAYIM, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. Please visit us any Friday evening at 7:30 at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102, front building right by the elevators. Have a blessed day.
Have a good week. You're listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk to the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world on TuneIn in 59 countries. Wow.